Who has been known to Telugu readers for the last 40 years as the person who brought to them enormous amounts of reading material in Telugu from all over the world. Many of us actually formed our own political consciousness through reading what Gita published. So that's a very, very important aspect of her work. What is interesting is that she documents a lot of that work in her book, which is there at the back end. It's called Land, Caste, and Women. Um, in the recent past, adding something else to that work of translation from English into Telugu, Gita is slowly beginning to think about uh, publishing in English. There's a new imprint for Hyderabad Book Trust called Southside Imprint, and that's already beginning to publish really, really fantastic books. New titles are coming up, and I think this is a shift that is important for us to think about as to why is this happening, who are we trying to reach, what is happening, and what is the work that is involved in this. Ramaswamy has been for the last many years. I've known him actually uh, for the last maybe about 15 years or so, around Singur Nandigram time when we first got to know him through social media, through blogging actually, as someone who was saying very, very interesting and important things about Calcutta. Ramaswamy is also associated with this project called Howdah Pilot Project in Calcutta. It begins in '96 to try and figure out how to work within communities in the middle of a bustling city where everything is collapsing, right? And that project then at some point of time begins to take off on its own. There are new people who are now running it in the last 20 years or so. A lot of new young blood has come to run this. Ramaswamy then moves on into translating a lot of work from Bangla into English. And this translation is of work that is very, very important within the Bengali reading public, but it has made accessible to the larger readership, otherwise it wouldn't have come out. So I wanted to hear from both of them about what this journey has been, and at 5 minutes each, if they can tell us, then we can open it up for questions and we'll see where we can go with this. Thank you.
I don't know what is possible in 5 minutes at all.
Whole world.
But I was listening to the last session, and it seemed it's so odd. About 70, 80 years ago, Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay wrote this Aranyak in Bengali, which is a much loved book, I am told there. And this was translated into Telugu. We published it as Vanavasi. And the translator told me an interesting story. He was working in Calcutta in All India Radio. Yes. And his landlady used to read lots of books. But this book, she'd read a little bit of it every day. So he asked her why. She told him this was such a wonderful book. And she read out bits of him that he could understand. And he liked it so much that he learned Bengali to translate this book. And I read it in English. And I still think it's one of the finest novels that Indian novelists have written. And the surprising thing about this book is that it's all about the environment and humans. And at that time, the discourse was in Indian language. Now, today you had this meeting just a little while ago, the one before ours, and the discourse was in English. This discourse is in English too. What happened to the discourse in Indian languages in this last 70 years? Why are we, like Anant said, why is Hyderabad Book Trust, which we started 43 years ago, to publish books in Telugu, and we were great snobs that we wouldn't do English, and now why are we getting into English? Is it the push of the market? Is it a change in the environment? Is it a change in ourselves? I mean, I haven't figured that out. But for a long time, I do know that publishing in an Indian language was like, you were the untouchables in the literary world. Um, in any English book which had 500 copies published was like way up on the caste hierarchy. But even if you published 10,000 in Telugu or in Tamil, nobody bothered about you. You didn't get a review. You didn't feature in the literary festivals. I realized this only when my own book was published in English, and I attended the literary festivals, and I saw the shallowness of those festivals and the richness of our own Indian language traditions. And I said, my God, how inverted this is. And why are we not exposing this terrible invertedness which is there, this discrimination against Indian languages and the rich traditions that we have? So, in publishing in English, are we turning traitors or are we contributing to the better good? I really don't know. I'm sort of posing this. I mean, this is a poser to everybody here. So I think I'm well within my 5 minutes. Here to Ramaswamy.
Thank you. A great honor for me to be sitting beside Gita, whose name I had known for a long time. I became a translator accidentally, but then persisted. So that is not an accident. Conscious choice. When the new India started in 2014, like everybody, I was also in a state of shock, kind of paralysis. What should we do? What is one to do? What is to be done? As Lenin titled his book. So, but now I know what I did between July 2020 and October 2023, just over 3 years. I completed translating 14 books. Of course, that was work that I had begun in 2015. So I brought all of them to completion and then new books and so on. So 8 have come out, or 7 have come out. 1 hasn't found a publisher and 6 are in press. And all the books I have translated are addressing the environment we are living in. For example, I translated a Bengali novel called Talash Nama by Ismail Darwish. That is a insider's look at the Muslim community. It's about a Muslim village. All people there are Muslim, and there's a neighboring Hindu hamlet which is considered part of that village. So it's about the daily life and daily conflicts and politics around the mosque and so on. And the book has been a bit of a phenomenon in terms of not readership, number of readership, but the nature of the readership. So large number of people who belong to the madrasa stream, they go to madrasas and graduate from there and become clerics of some kind in mosques. All those people are reading this book, and most of them have never read a storybook in their lives. But somebody told them, please read that book. It's about you. And so it just holds a mirror up to the Muslim society and poses a challenge to them. And a Muslim has done this and has done that so disarmingly that everybody can simply accept that book. Or another Muslim author called Ansaruddin. He's a marginal farmer and started writing at the age of 30. He's same age as me. And he's a kind of memory keeper in a literary style. So I translated a book of his in English. It's called The Song of the Faraway Village. It's 5 essays about the life and milieu of the rural Muslim society in Bengal. In Bengal, there's an expression, Ora Bangali na ora Musulman. He's not a Bengali, he's a Muslim. Forgetting that there's a whole nation of Bengali Muslims next door, And Bangladesh is the custodian of the Bengali language today, not India or West Bengal by any means, and that has only grown stronger in the last 9 years. So that work addresses, my translation work directly addresses the environment we are living in, and that is all I can do. I have lost all my capabilities now other than translation, and I'm doing that. So coming here, meeting so many people, hearing Sabika's poetry and so on, convinced me that a lot of people are doing the only thing that they can do, and that is their way of addressing the environment. I am not Bengali. I was born in a Tamil household, but grew up in Calcutta and worked in Calcutta, and so that is how I learned the Bangla language. And my social activist background also sensitized me to this question of translating voices from the margins. So the writer I began translating with, Shubhimal Mishra, assiduously kept himself outside the mainstream all his life. He only wrote in what are called little magazines, small limited circulation journals, and then compiled those writings and published them in book form himself, and took his books to the Calcutta Book Fair. They have a little magazine pavilion there. So he would go there and sell his books, and a lot of people from different parts of Calcutta or West Bengal would arrive at that book fair only to meet him and get his new books. And sometimes he would interview the potential buyer to determine whether he's capable of reading his books or not. And so he maintained this practice for over 40 years of writing. So his name is iconic to some people who are familiar with his work, but many people never heard his name. And because he didn't publish with any mainstream publisher or write in any mainstream newspaper or magazine, so because he had a severe critique against them, so people are not familiar with his name. But through translation in English and by word of mouth, a lot of people in India as well as abroad have begun to hear his name. So the reason I translate, the basic root of it is a desire to share. When you hear something wonderful, powerful, I want you also to enjoy it. I want you also to react as I did to this great novel or to this powerful writer. In conclusion, I just want to read a very short thing that I came across, quite inspiring, in the Lancaster International Fiction Lecture titled "What Fiction," in brackets, including in translation, can do in times like ours. Georgi Gospodinov, the Bulgarian writer who won the International Booker Prize for 2023, said the following. The translation is by Angela Rodel. You might argue, well, aren't propaganda and fiction the same thing? They both use stories and offer various versions of the world. No. Let's try to see the difference. The subtle poison of propaganda and conspiracy theories lies in the fact that they replace basic concepts within amassed human knowledge. They reduce centuries of culture and civilization. They burn down and overturn the entire archive of the human. Whereas real literature, fiction, and storytelling build on this archive, constructing its versions of the world using coordinate systems of good and evil, lies and truth, the humans and the human and the inhumane, the permissible and the impermissible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama and Gita. I'm just going to open this up to the floor. Comments, questions. Rita. Let me use the mic.
This is really very thought. Yes, I think that's fine. Thank you so much for this. You've given so much to think about. I was trying to perhaps think back to the question that you asked Gita about why, um, you know, why all of this excitement about English and what happened to the richness of the conversations that used to take place in South Asian languages. And I was just wondering, like, hasn't there been a just systematic, like, sort of killing of the, publication industries in the regional languages, or however we want to call those languages. And I'm specifically thinking of like say the early 90s in places like UP, where the prices of the Hindi newspaper kept going up to the point that many people who used to get the Hindi newspapers, and there was a range of them, the reading of the newspaper just vanished, and and on the other hand, the English newspaper was becoming cheaper, and so anyway, I mean that's just one very specific observation. But I was just wondering, like, have we even undertaken that kind of an analysis of what exactly happened? How has this been a very very systematic process, and what has contributed to it? That was just something that came to mind.
Do you want to take more questions?
As you want, however you
Let's take two or three more questions, comments, observations, and then get back.
Hi, my name is Anjana. Um, I've been a teacher also, so something that I've noticed when I was a student and when I was also a teacher is, there is a huge lack of interest towards Telugu. Um, that's been there when I was a student, and even now as a teacher, I notice with my students and just that their parents, they're just like, no, you know what, like learning Telugu is not important. We're not interested in building that as a practice, as a language, either spoken or written. And obviously, I don't know what the situation is in other states, but there is obviously a much more inclination towards English and definitely even Hindi. So I think I wanted to also ask Gita ma'am, just what are your thoughts? What have you observed? And sir, if you can also share what's the situation maybe in like Kolkata, is it similar where people are just like the regional language is also not as important to us. We keep talking about maintaining and just like improving the importance of our regional languages. But again, that's not happening. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Amita.
Thanks, Anant, and thanks, Gita ji and Ramaswamy for that very interesting provocations, I would say. So my reflection basically comes from the fact that I was educated as an English medium student, okay? But a medium student. What that meant was that there is a very clear recognition that there is a mother tongue, and all my literary reading has actually been in Marathi. And Marathi also stood for very interesting discourses, conflicting, contesting discourses as I grew up in the 1980s, okay, 65 to 80s is perhaps what I would say. But what I'm seeing today is a different thing, okay, and which is what I wanted to point out. Suddenly I see today when one is talking about the revanchism linked to Marathi, it stands for something which is very, very regressive. It's a very aggressive thing. Every shop has to have a Marathi name. And why is that not there? And if that's not there, then that's what now has become very famous as Khayal Khata in Maharashtra, in Mumbai. Okay? And basically it means that you break the shop, okay? Or you break wherever you are going, whether it is tolls or other means of on platforms, etc. etc. So I think there is a conflict here. In some ways, English today, not only has it been popularized and the base of readers is much more, there is a reducing base for the local language, and the fact that it doesn't stand for many progressive discourses. So, how does one kind of bring that on board?
Any other comments?
They say poetry cannot be translated because it loses its beauty. But for large essays, maybe you can retain the accuracy of what the author is trying to make. But how do you deal with that problem of shifting from beauty to accuracy in writing? Because there are words which means a lot, have deep meaning, which in writing also. How do you deal with that? Is English kind of growing a vocabulary language which can encompass this kind of change in languages, or is there a way to deal with it?
That's for you entirely.
One of the Telugu authors that had a great influence on my own reading and thinking actually says through one of his characters in a slightly longish story that for Telugu people, broadly, English is the language for abusing people, you say rascal, idiot, whatever. Sanskrit is the language for blessing, that's why you learn language. In Telugu, you broadly use for bargaining and haggling with your vegetable vendor. And the reason why he says this, I think, is a wonderful life in Telugu. Right? He says this is that there is a culture of transactions. There's a culture of casteist, of patriarchal, of capitalist practices that actually transmit through language. And if we don't pay attention to those and then craft our language through that, we are not going to get anywhere. So the reason why in all of the kind of writing that Gita and Rama are talking about, and even what Anita was alluding to this now, is about that figuring out that craft of doing something. It could be in English, it could be in Telugu, it could be in any of the Indian languages, but that I think is the politics of figuring out what practices do we want to work with. So,
Yeah, this.
but not in a it's in a novel called Aishwarya.
These are interesting points, but I feel so sad that someone from the Telugu or Urdu languages is not speaking, because this is their land. Ramaswamy is not from Bengal, I'm not from Andhra either. Both of us are Tamil speaking originally, so we are into converted tongues really. I mean, his Bangla and my Telugu. The three questions are related as I see them. The first thing about killing of Indian languages systematically, I don't see any, a Satan out there. I don't see an enemy out there. We did it ourselves. We did it ourselves because I think largely post-liberalism or the kind of economic system that came into India convinced people that unless they took to English, they don't have a future. So people themselves marched. It was the march of people towards English, and government responded accordingly by, with both Andhra and Telangana, the two Telugu states, public government education is not in Telugu, it's in English. I mean, which is unlike very many other states, I think both Bengal, Tamil Nadu, language in the government schools is in the regional language, but here it is in English. So Andhra Pradesh realized 20 years ago that Telugu is not going to get anywhere, and we shifted to English. So there's no enemy out there except what is here. And despite the killing, despite the suicide of our languages, the 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 Indian language remains far more radical than the English language. The discourse in the Indian language is far more radical than it is in English language. So, which is why I said I feel bad that someone who reads and writes and speaks Urdu or Telugu is not there here, because they would have had such more, they would have richer thoughts. So the thing is, uh, if we are committing suicide, then it is we who have to stop ourselves at the brink and bring ourselves up. No amount of patronage, no amount of thing will convince what is there in our minds and souls that we want to continue our heritage. Because um, if you see the stones of Golconda some 20 years back, I lived next to Golconda Fort, were used, actually taken by the local people to build their own walls. But now there are groups here which talk of conservation, which protect Golconda stones, right? Except that the discourse is all in English and not in Urdu or in Telugu, which should be. So the discourse is returned to the Indian language. And the activists who were speaking earlier, in the earlier session, could infiltrate into the Telugu and Urdu language. Either infiltrate, or I don't know what is the way, but that is the only way that, again, this mass march of the lemmings to suicide can be stopped. I don't think English language discourse matters really, because it's people who are making the decisions at all levels.
Right, same in Bengal also. Future of the Bengali language in West Bengal is very bleak. All parents send their children to English medium schools. Bangla is the medium of instruction in schools, and CPM government abolished English from the primary school on the excuse that they're making life easier for the children. And they started learning English only in class 6 or 7 or something. And then that was cancelled, and now they start learning in elementary school. But the quality of government schools, the quality of teaching in government schools and so on, leaves a lot to be desired. And obviously that has had an impact on the quality of discourse in Bangla and the nature of writing in Bangla. It just shrunk. And of course, a lot of writers write with a commercial purpose or with a mass popularity kind of aspiration. So, literary Bangla future is very bleak. But then on the other hand, somebody like me who's not even a Bengali and an English medium person, at a mature stage in life moves to Bangla and is sharing the treasures of Bangla with the outside world. So, things will happen. About your question, I was in a seminar in the New India Foundation a few months back. So they had specifically commissioned the Center for Translation in Ashoka University to do a study on translation of the whole translation industry in India. How can one translate accurately? In many talks on translation, I begin by saying that the first axiom of translation is impossible. And the second axiom is translation is necessary. So the translator walks on this tightrope, between impossibility and possibility. But personally speaking, some things I leave out because it is not translatable. It is so embedded in the original language and culture and history and so on that if you translate, you have to make huge annotations. And what I translate, I try to reproduce in English. So people read my translation and say it's as if it was originally written in English by that author. So I think that's a compliment because, say, I'm translating a Dalit author and his life experience. At one level, it is bizarre that it is being read in English. It is ridiculous because we know what English means in India with class and privilege and all that. So how can a Dalit character be speaking in English or he is being described in English? So I guess the quality of translation can make the reader forget that it is English and sees it as part of the Indian milieu. Translation is principally publisher pushed, publisher driven. Publisher decides I want to bring out this book and he commissions a translator to do it and so on. That's how it's been. But I am what I am doing is translator driven translation. I decide that that book must be translated or that author must be translated, and I do it, and then I correspond with publishers, and then they agree or disagree, and I find a publisher. I've been fortunate that all the stuff that I've translated has been published. And a huge change has happened in the last 10, 15 years. Indian literary fiction from Indian languages translated into English has come into its own fully. Last year and this year, the JCB Prize for Literature, which is the biggest cash prize, the winners were translated books, this time from Tamil and last year from Urdu. And in the short list of 5 books this year, 3 were translations and 2 were originally in English. So, Indian writers like Perumal Murugan and Vivek Shanbag are getting an audience much beyond their own domestic shores and are being read via English by people. So that is huge and that change has happened. But much more needs to happen, especially you cannot live as a translator. You can't have translation as your livelihood. And now, after many years of translation, if I give up, stop doing anything else and just translate every day, I will make some money, but that will be less than the starting salary of a college lecturer. So,
All right. So I have 3 people in mind from whom I want to hear. One is Gautam Bhan. One is Sajjad Shahid Saab, who is sitting at the back and gave me a very meaningful look when Gita said, "Where are the Urdu people here?" And there is Kupili Padma sitting right next to Gautam Bhan, who I'll just say just a couple of words about both, all 3 of them. Gautam Bhan is someone who I know can actually work equally well in English and Hindi. I don't know many people of his generation who can do that so beautifully as he does. Sajjad Saab is one person to whom I will always go when I have any doubt about Dakhni. The one person who knows Urdu, Dakhni, and all of the writing that has come up in this region over the last many centuries. And Kupili Padma is one author who is most widely read among 3 generations of Telugu reading women in this region. As a columnist, as a short story writer, as a poet, she's someone who's been very influential. So I want to hear from each of them quick comments and then we can break for lunch.
Okay, I actually had a question that I'm just going to leave out. I'll disguise it as a comment, but it's a question. So the first one actually is just a personal curiosity and something, Rama, I wanted to ask you for many years, which is actually I'm thinking a little bit about your relationship with Tamil for both of you. It's, Gita used the word to be in converted tongues. And I just was curious in terms of being writers who translate in a third language, has what that has done, or what it means, or just what your relationship with Tamil is, either personally or professionally. It's been just a curiosity. And the second thing I wanted to ask is something a little bit about the role of teachers, and to ask as a teacher, because this is something that I feel, we just continuously fail at, because I personally struggle with very deeply. And part of me wonders about, in this current context, given all these structural changes in education, etc., in the political economy of the returns on language, whether there is a notion of bilinguality that can help us learn slightly differently than playing the game of English versus modern Indian languages, and what that would look like. And partly what I'm thinking about also is that when I talk to a lot of my students about translation, there is a sense, and also when I talk to other people who work between languages, there is a sense here that there is an entry barrier, that unless your competence in languages is of a certain sophistication, you should not dare to translate. You should not dare to begin. And that when you talk to people about writing, everyone has an idea that they can write at least a short story, if not a novel. But that kind of ordinary desire to be part of a world of writing, but think of yourself as a writer even in the first word you write, is not there for translation. The idea that you can play with translation, do it badly, but it is still worth doing. I feel like there is a sense that if I often tell people, why don't you write in two languages? They're saying, I don't know if I'm good enough. And there is a sense that, but our writing got better because we wrote. Our translation will only get better if you translate. So sometimes I wonder, as a teacher, as part of what I should be doing is saying, just translate. Don't wait until you think your Hindi or your Urdu is. My Hindi was crap until I was 21 years old. It did not come from my schooling or it being my native tongue. It came from work that forced me to get my shit together. Otherwise, I would be laughed out of the rooms I was in. And so I learned. And so just this thought on the idea of the bilingual, and can translation feel a little personal to people like writing? So we make it ordinary, we make it joyful, we make it a space of learning. Because otherwise we will have professional translators and monolingual speakers and writers, and I worry about that.
Just a quick response. I'm delighted because I get translators from ordinary people. None of the translators are translators. I just got two people in Lamakaan. I met them for the first time and I got a little bit of the background and I said, will you translate for me from Telugu to English? Both were delighted. We don't write. I said, no, it's just if you like the original piece and I know you have competence in the language to be translated, I'm sure you can do it. I got their email IDs, and so I think, and as teachers, I think if you can encourage every of your students to translate, I'm sure they know one language, one source language good enough to translate from. The competence, not competence so much as a level of competence in the language to be translated into, so that the editing is not so tough. I think every one of us can be a translator. I can't translate now from Tamil to English. I can translate from Telugu to English because Telugu is the language in which I bloomed, the sense in which my work was, and where I found my love and my activism. And so that led me to literature. And so that world which I love, I want to get into English. That's a language in which I have competence. So I think every one of us, every one of your students, because they're certainly competent in English nowadays. Students who come to any university where you teach, for example, should be competent in English. And they must be having some source language. And the good news is that so many young people who didn't know their own, what you call mother tongue well, are now learning it so that they can translate into English. That's part of the good news. Whether they'll be able to write in Telugu or Urdu, I'm not sure. But there's enough rich literature in our own Indian languages to keep them going for some time.
Thank you for your reflections, Gautam. About Tamil, state of my Tamil is like a withered plant. And I alone am responsible for that. It's just because the circumstances to be speaking in Tamil have shrunk. Some years back, I was in Tamil Nadu, and I thought that if I lived here, then I would become more fluent. But I would never have the kind of masterly grasp of all things Bangla that I have sitting in West Bengal, just through my life trajectory. I'd have to be born again in Tamil Nadu and do various things to have that kind of grasp, not just over the language, society, history, politics, culture, all that. I'm embedded in that, and when I translate, actually I'm translating culture. And like you said, you couldn't speak Hindi. I also had only pidgin Hindi, though I studied in Dehradun, and I couldn't speak Hindi at all. And then I had to address a press conference when I was 30 years old in Bokaro. And Hindi just flowed out of my mouth, because I know what I want to say, and my brain is just grasping words and syntax to allow it to be delivered, and also the sensitivity to speaking correctly, and always hearing words, hearing terms, hearing idioms, and so on. And then, like you do with English, so same you do with other languages. Most Indians are bilingual or multilingual, and that is a model for educational institutions to think about. We must produce multilingual citizens. And in translation, the revolution that is waiting to happen is from one bhasha to another bhasha. And that can't happen through the mediation of English. I translated Shubhiman Misra into Bangla, a Malayali lady translated my English into Malayalam, and then I went and stayed with her for 3 days in Rittu, and she read out her Malayalam, and I was looking at my English and the Bangla. And since I am a Palagat Tamil, I know you can say 70% Malayalam. So I could understand what she's reading, and I could help her to make the Malayalam translation of the Bangla closer to the Bangla than the English had been. Because these are two Indian languages, that is possible, if you can just train your ear to catch sounds from another language, vocabulary and words derived from Sanskrit are all identical, but they pronounce it differently. Yeah.
आनंद साहब मैं सुनने आया था
सुनने ना कहने में क्या इतना अंतर है?
बहुत ज्यादा वो कई बातें हुई हैं तर्जुमे की बात ट्रांसलेशन की हुई I was also forced into translating primarily because I felt that my children were getting distance from their own inherited culture and heritage. नया जमाना है, नए मसले हैं उनके. हमारे जमाने में नानी दादी के पास वक्त होता था तो कहानियां सुनाते थे. अब नानी दादी खुद ही इतने मसरूफ हैं कि बच्चों को कोई कहानी नहीं सुनाता. I felt that somehow this has to be communicated to the next generation, and that's how I started writing about Hyderabad. And I agree, sir, it doesn't pay. I contributed a weekly column to Times of India for more than 4 years on Hyderabad culture and various aspects. I was not paid a single rupee. But I went on because I wanted, there was a personal interest that the children of Hyderabad, succeeding generation, should know about their own history and culture. एक तो ये मुश्किल है. दूसरी मुश्किल ये होती है ट्रांसलेशन में कि जब कभी ट्रांसलेट करने बैठे तो फैज याद आ जाते. कोई साहब फैज के पास पहुंचे कि आई वांट टू ट्रांसलेट योर पोएम. उसने कहा नहीं, छोड़ दो यार. पीछे पड़े रहे 3-4 बार. आखिरी में कहा कि फैज ने कहा कि तर्जुमे के लिए लाजिम है कि शख्स को दोनों में से कम एक जबान आनी चाहिए. तो मुश्किल ये है कि जो हालात आजकल हैं हमारे यहाँ, that makes it very difficult because there is a stress that English is the medium, English is the language which will grant you success where you can achieve. ये एक साइकी हो गई हमारी, उसकी वजह से हम अपनी मादरी जबान बोलते चले गए. एंड रिजल्ट ये है कि ना अंग्रेजी आती है ना मादरी जबान आती है. ये बड़ी मुश्किल है. ये है। और दूसरे है कि अपना जितना आपका कल्चरल हिस्ट्री, सोसाइटी, डेवलपमेंट सोसाइटी, एक प्राइमरी सोर्स अगर आपको मिलेगा वो तो रीजनल लिटरेचर ही में मिलेगा और कहीं नहीं मिलेगा। ये हिस्टोरियंस एक पीछे पड़े रहते हैं कि हर चीज के लिए सबूत लाओ, ये एविडेंस लाओ, ये आर्कियोलॉजिकल लाओ। अरे जबान में खुद उसका जो है छुपे हुए हैं पूरे राज, वो भी तो कोशिश करो पढ़ने की। दखनी का जिक्र किया अनंत ने। दखनी को भी अंग्रेजी में लाना बहुत मुश्किल काम है। वैसे ही there's a common belief that दखनी बहुत मुश्किल जबान है, आर्किक जबान है, कोई नहीं समझता। आप कोशिश तो करके देखिए। मैंने क्योंकि कोई और नहीं कर रहा था तो मुझे जैसा कोशिश करनी पड़ी। And I ended up writing an article which is now being quoted, but no one else has taken the work further. This is a mine of information that you have in Dakhini about the region, about the Deccan. ये और बात है, अनंत साहब कहते हैं कि वो दक्कन नहीं रहा, अब ये सिर्फ एक ज्योग्राफिकल रीजन हो गया है। मगर वो कल्चरल भी जो है उसमें एक वो है कॉर्पस जो होता है, इसमें जो है आपको ऐसी चीजें मिलती हैं जो लाजवाब होती हैं। और सोसाइटी है, और हाउ पीपल बिहेव, about the degree of permissiveness in medieval society of this period. अजीब अजीब चीजें आपको मालूम होती है। आपको जो है हैरत होगी कि क्या क्या चीज इस जबान में नहीं है। तो ये कई बातें हैं। वैसे मोहतरमा आपसे 2 बार कोशिश हुई मिलने की, मगर हो नहीं सका। I was not here last time. I think Ali Asghar of Goa said we should meet and discuss something about a book on Dakhini or something. वो शायद आगे कभी हो तो हो सकता है कुछ काम हो सके। शुक्रिया।
హిందీ ఇంగ్లీష్ అయిపోయింది, నేను తెలుగులో చెప్పమన్నారు. ఓకే. మాకు బెంగాలీ లిటరేచర్ బెంగాలీ లిటరేచర్ ఎంత బాగా తెలుసు అంటే ఆంధ్రదేశంలో శరత్ ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్ రాగానే దేశీ పబ్లికేషన్స్ నుంచి ప్రతి జనరేషన్ లో ఒక శ్రీకాంత్ అనే పేరు ఉంటుంది. అలాగే వనవాసి నవల ఫస్ట్ వేసినప్పుడు సరస్వతి బుక్ ట్రస్ట్ ని రాజమండ్రిలో పబ్లిష్ అయినప్పుడు వనవాసి అరణ్యకాలంలో వనవాసి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు మేము మైల్స్ నడుచుకొని వెళ్ళేవాళ్ళం ఆ పుస్తకాన్ని వెతుక్కొని పట్టుకోవటం కోసం. ఇప్పట్లో PDF పంపించడానికి లేవు కదా. ఇప్పటికీ మొన్న గీత తన దీని నుంచి వేసినప్పుడు విభూతి భూషణ్ బందోపాధ్యాయ ప్రతి రీడర్కి అత్యంత ఇష్టమైన రైతులు. అది ఎందుకు సాధ్యమైంది? ఇంగ్లీష్లో ట్రాన్స్లేట్ అవ్వడం వల్ల అది తెలుగులోకి వచ్చింది, మన ఇచ్చామతి వరకు కూడా. అలానే మాకు తమిళ్ తెలుసు, మలయాళం రైటర్స్ తెలుసు, అస్సామీ నుంచి ఇందిరా గోస్వామి నోవెల్ తెలుసు. ఇట్లా కన్నడ నుంచి అయితే ఇంకా అసలు ఎంత ఫేవరెట్ రైటర్స్ చెప్పలేము. మలయాళం నుంచి మేము ఒడియా, అమృత వెళ్ళినప్పుడు ఇన్ని లాంగ్వేజెస్ నుంచి ఇంతమంది రైటర్స్ మాకు తెలియటానికి, తెలుగులో చాలా మంది లీడర్స్ కి తెలియటానికి ప్రధాన కారణం అవి ఇంగ్లీష్లోకి వెళ్ళి ఇంగ్లీష్ నుంచి తెలుగులోకి ట్రాన్స్లేట్ అవుతుంది. మాకు ఆల్మోస్ట్ 100 years అయిపోయింది తెలుగు షార్ట్ స్టోరీ వచ్చి. ఇందాక అనంత్ మెన్షన్ చేసిన కుటుంబరావు గారు తెలుగులో రాయని ప్రక్రియ లేదు, రాయని కథ లేదు, రాయని మనస్తత్వం లేదు. ఎనీ మిడిల్ క్లాస్ పర్సన్ ని మనం మెన్షన్ చేయాలి, వాళ్ళ పర్సనాలిటీస్ అని చెప్పాలంటే మేము ఎప్పుడు ఆయన్నే పట్టుకుంటాం. అలాగే స్త్రీలకు సంబంధించి ఆల్మోస్ట్ 100 years క్రితమే స్త్రీలకి మేధస్ ఉంటుంది, దానికి వ్యాయామం కావాలి, శరీరం ఉంటుంది, దానికి వ్యాయామం కావాలంటే ఎక్సర్సైజ్ కావాలి, మైండ్ అండ్ సోల్ అని చెప్పిన చరణ్ గారు, ఇట్లా అనేక మంది రైటర్స్ రైటింగ్, కారా మాస్టర్, రామశాస్త్రి గారు, వీళ్ళ రైటింగ్స్ ఇంగ్లీష్లోకి వెళ్ళటం అనేది చాలా లేట్ అయింది, చాలా తక్కువ వెళ్ళాయి.
సో మేము ఎక్కడికి వెళ్ళినా మీ రైటర్స్ ఎవరు, మీరేం రాస్తారు, మీరు ఎక్కడి నుంచి వచ్చారు, ఇవి ఎక్కువ అడుగుతారు. మేము చాలా మెన్షన్ చేస్తాం వాళ్ళ రైటింగ్. సో తర్వాత ఇంగ్లీష్లో ఎక్కడైనా ఒక ఇంగ్లీష్ కథని చదివినా మేమందరం ఉత్సాహపడతాం, తెలుగు పాఠకులకి అందించాలని ట్రాన్స్లేట్ చేసేస్తాం. కానీ తెలుగు నుంచి ఇంగ్లీష్కి వెళ్ళిన రైటింగ్ చాలా చాలా తక్కువ. మాకు ట్రాన్స్లేట్ చేసే వాళ్ళు కూడా చాలా తక్కువ. దానికి డిఫరెంట్ కారణాలు చెప్తారు. కొంతమంది బాగా చేస్తారు, మీ టైంకి మేము విలువ ఇస్తాము, పేమెంట్ ఇస్తాము అంటే కూడా చాలా మంది చేయరు. ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్కి అమౌంట్ తీసుకోకూడదని చాలా మంది ఫీల్ అవుతారు. సో తెలుగులో ఉన్న సాహిత్యము, అట్లానే ఎనీ లాంగ్వేజ్లో ఉన్న సాహిత్యాన్ని ఇంగ్లీష్లో ట్రాన్స్లేట్ చేస్తేనే అదర్ ఎస్పెషల్లీ భారతీయ లాంగ్వేజెస్లోకి వెళ్ళాలి. ఇండియన్ లాంగ్వేజెస్ కంటే ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్ చాలా చాలా అవసరము. అలాగే తెలుగులో వరల్డ్ వైడ్ ఉన్న లిటరేచర్ కూడా చాలా ట్రాన్స్లేట్ అయ్యి వచ్చింది. దానివల్ల కూడా ఇంగ్లీష్ చదవలేని వాళ్ళందరూ కూడా తెలుగులో చదువుకోవటం, అది మార్క్వేజ్ నుంచి ఉంది, చాలా మంది రైటర్స్ నుంచి తెలుగులోకి ట్రాన్స్లేషన్స్. సో నేను ఎవరినైనా సరే ఇంగ్లీష్ వచ్చి తెలుగు రెండు వచ్చిన వాళ్ళు తెలుగు నుంచి ఇంగ్లీష్లో ట్రాన్స్లేట్ చేస్తే ఇక్కడున్న రిచ్ లిటరేచర్, నిజంగా చెప్తున్నాను, అత్యద్భుతమైన లిటరేచర్ తెలుగులో ఉంది. కథ ఉంది, నవల ఉంది, పోయిటరీ కూడా ఉంది. ఇవన్నీ వెళ్ళాలంటే వీ నీడ్ ట్రాన్స్లేటర్స్. థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్ అండి.
All right, thank you so much, everyone.
I was in Bhubaneswar last weekend. I think there was a arts and literature festival. So there was a poet from Croatia, and the session was literature during war, keeping in mind the Gaza crisis. So this woman, her name is Lana, she read out a speech in English, which I was very moved, and I asked her for a copy of it, and she sent it. So I would like it to be translated in multiple languages. I've asked my friends in Gujarati, Marathi, Bangla. So if anyone wants to translate that speech in any language, Telugu, Urdu, please. Urdu I already shared it with Sarika yesterday. Telugu especially, if somebody would like, I will share it. Thank you.
Panda has already volunteered to do that.
And just think, we should appropriate the slogan of Nike for translation. Just do it.
All right, thank you very much.